My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and what I'm about to reveal is not a story, it's a turning point. One conversation, behind closed doors, rewrote Russia's entire strategy in Africa, and today I will expose it. 3 weeks ago, at exactly 3:17 a.m. West African time, my secure satellite phone rang. The caller ID showed just 4 letters, Kremlin. On the other end was Vladimir Putin himself speaking in flawless French, a language he rarely uses in diplomatic calls. President Traore, he said, and I could hear something in his voice I had never heard from any world leader before. Genuine concern mixed with what I can only describe as respect. That 47-minute conversation revealed something that shocked even me. The master strategist who has outmaneuvered NATO, checkmated the West in Syria, and turned global energy into his personal weapon, was calling a 35-year-old African revolutionary at 3 a.m. because he had a problem he couldn't solve. That problem? Me. Stay with me. Because what happened in that conversation will explain why the Kremlin is now studying every move we make in Burkina Faso, and why Putin himself admitted something about Africa that will change how you see global power forever. The events that led to the call. To understand why Vladimir Putin called me at 3 a.m., you need to understand what we had been doing that caught Moscow's attention. 6 months earlier, something unprecedented happened in West Africa. For the first time in 60 years, 3 African countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, simultaneously expelled foreign military bases and formed their own defense alliance without asking permission from any world power. But here's what made it truly extraordinary. We didn't replace French bases with Russian bases. We didn't swap Western dependency for Eastern dependency. We created something entirely new, genuine African sovereignty backed by African resources and African decision-making. Putin had been watching this unfold with a mixture of admiration and confusion. For 20 years, his Africa strategy had been simple. Wait for African countries to get frustrated with Western neglect, then offer Russian alternatives, Russian weapons, Russian advisors, Russian protection, always with Russian control. But we weren't following the script. We were writing our own. The breaking point came when we announced something that sent shockwaves through Moscow's Africa policy establishment. Burkina Faso would begin processing its own gold instead of exporting raw materials to foreign refineries. Do you understand what this means? For decades, Africa sells raw gold for $60 per gram, and foreign companies process it and sell it back to us for $200 per gram. We were keeping the $140 difference. That's not just economics, that's revolution. But what truly alarmed the Kremlin was what happened next. Instead of asking Russia, China, or the West for technology and expertise to build our gold processing facilities, we partnered with African American engineers and investors who understood both advanced technology and African conditions. That's when Putin realized he wasn't just watching another African military coup or economic reform. He was watching the emergence of a new model of African independence that didn't need Russian partnership, Russian weapons, or Russian anything. And that terrified him. What I'm about to tell you was supposed to remain classified, but I believe you deserve to know how global powers really view Africa's potential. According to sources within the Russian intelligence services, Putin had been receiving daily briefings about our activities for 3 months. The reports painted a picture that contradicted everything Russia believed about African capabilities. Russian analysts couldn't understand how a landlocked African country with limited resources was implementing strategies that even Russia struggled to execute. We were expelling foreign influence without creating power vacuums. We were building regional alliances without triggering international backlash. We were attracting investment without accepting dependency. Most puzzling to Russian intelligence was our partnership with African Americans. Putin's advisors had initially dismissed these connections as symbolic gestures with limited practical impact. They were catastrophically wrong. When Dr. Marcus Johnson, the African-American software engineer, helped us design telecommunication systems that were more secure than Russian alternatives, Moscow took notice. When Dr. Keisha Williams, the renewable energy expert, helped us achieve energy independence that Russia hadn't managed in their own regions, Putin's advisors started asking uncomfortable questions. But the moment that triggered Putin's 3 a.m. phone call was when Dr. Michael Thompson, the cardiovascular surgeon, helped us establish medical training programs that attracted students from across Africa, students who might otherwise have studied in Moscow. That's when Russian intelligence reported something that made Putin realize the true scope of what we were building. African American professionals aren't just providing technical assistance to individual African countries. They're creating networks of expertise and investment that could make Russian influence across the entire continent irrelevant. The report that landed on Putin's desk 3 days before he called me contained a single sentence that explained everything. If this African-American alliance succeeds, Russia will lose Africa without a single shot being fired. The conversation that shook the Kremlin. Now I can't play you the actual recording. That conversation was classified at the highest levels of both governments. But I can tell you exactly what happened, because every word is burned into my memory. Putin opened with what he thought was a power move. President Traore, I've been following your remarkable achievements with great interest. Russia has extensive experience managing Western interference and building genuine sovereignty. Perhaps we should discuss how our experience can accelerate your success. I could hear the expectation in his voice. He was offering me the same deal he had offered dozens of African leaders. Russian support in exchange for Russian influence. Protection from Western pressure in exchange for alignment with Russian interests. But my response was not what he expected. Mr. Putin, I said, with respect, Russia has been in Africa for 20 years, and you're still fighting for influence with France and America. We've been truly independent for 18 months, and we're already achieving results that your experts said were impossible. Perhaps you should be asking what Russia can learn from Africa. The silence that followed lasted 37 seconds. I know because I counted. When Putin spoke again, his tone had completely changed. The patronizing confidence was gone, replaced by something I had never heard from any world leader, genuine curiosity. President Traore, he said slowly, what exactly are you building in Africa? That question opened a conversation that revealed more about global power dynamics than any diplomatic summit or intelligence briefing ever could. The revelation that changed Putin's perspective. For the next 20 minutes, I explained to Vladimir Putin something that no African leader had ever explained to any world power. We weren't trying to replace one form of dependency with another. We were creating something entirely new. Mr. Putin, I said, for centuries, Africa has been told we need foreign expertise, foreign investment, foreign protection to succeed. But we've discovered something revolutionary. When Africans work with African Americans who understand both advanced systems and African conditions, we can build solutions that are better than anything foreign powers offer. I told him about our telecommunications networks that were more secure than Chinese systems and more affordable than European alternatives. I described our renewable energy projects that were more efficient than Russian technology and more sustainable than American approaches. I explained our medical programs that were attracting students from around the world because they combined cutting-edge innovation with African healing traditions. The difference, I explained, is that African Americans aren't trying to control us. They're trying to come home. That changes everything. Putin asked a question that revealed how fundamental he misunderstood our relationship. But President Traore, surely African Americans expect something in return for their investment and expertise? Yes, I replied. They expect to be welcomed home to a continent that's proud of what we've built together. They expect to be part of an African renaissance that honors our shared heritage while embracing our global potential. They expect to help build the Africa our ancestors dreamed of before colonialism scattered our people across the world. Another long silence. Then Putin said something that shocked me. President Traore, in 20 years of African engagement, no one has ever explained their motivations to me in those terms. The moment Putin realized his mistake. What happened next revealed why Putin had really called me at 3 a.m. President Traore, he said, I must be honest with you. Russia's Africa strategy has been based on the assumption that African countries would always need external support to achieve significant development. We positioned ourselves as the alternative to Western dependency. Then he admitted something that I believe no African leader has ever heard from any world power. But what you're describing suggests that Africa doesn't need to depend on anyone if Africans work together effectively. That changes the entire global balance of power. For the first time in our conversation, I heard vulnerability in Putin's voice. The man who had rebuilt Russia from Soviet collapse, who had challenged American hegemony across multiple continents, was grappling with a scenario he had never considered. What if Africa didn't need Russia at all? Mr. Putin, I said, Russia spent decades positioning itself as the counterweight to Western power. But what if the real counterweight to all external power is internal unity? What if the solution to foreign dependency isn't better foreign partners, but stronger domestic capabilities? I could practically hear him thinking through the implications. If Africa could achieve genuine independence through African-American cooperation, it wouldn't just reduce Russian influence. It would prove that other regions could do the same thing. It would demonstrate that authentic cooperation based on shared heritage and values was more powerful than strategic alliances based on mutual interests. That realization led to the most shocking moment of our entire conversation. 25 minutes into our call, Putin said something that I believe reveals more about global power dynamics than any public speech or diplomatic document. President Traore, I need to ask you something directly. Is what you're building with African Americans a model that could be replicated in other regions? I understood immediately what he was really asking. Could other scattered peoples reunite across borders to create economic and cultural power centers that made traditional great power influence irrelevant? Mr. Putin, I replied, we're proving that family connections are stronger than strategic calculations. We're demonstrating that shared heritage creates more sustainable partnerships than shared interests. We're showing that when people work together because they belong together, they build things that external powers can't control or replicate. Putin's response revealed the depth of his concern. President Traoré, what you're describing isn't just African development. It's a fundamental challenge to how global power has been organized for centuries. Then he made an admission that still gives me chills. Russia rebuilt itself by proving that Western dominance wasn't permanent. But you're proving that external dominance of any kind might not be necessary. That's more revolutionary than anything Russia has achieved. The moment that changed everything. But the most significant moment of our conversation came when Putin asked me a question that revealed he understood exactly what was at stake. President Traoré, what would it take for Russia to be a genuine partner in what you're building, rather than another power trying to influence your direction? That question showed me that Putin had grasped something fundamental. We weren't anti-Russian or anti-anyone. We were pro-African in a way that made external control unnecessary, rather than simply replacing one controller with another. Mr. Putin, I said, genuine partnership means accepting that Africa will make decisions based on African interests, even when those decisions don't align with Russian interests. It means supporting African success even when that success reduces African dependence on Russian support. It means celebrating African unity, even when that unity makes Russian influence less necessary. The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses. This wasn't Putin calculating his next move. This was Putin grappling with a completely new paradigm. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone I had never heard from any world leader. President Traoré, I have built my career on understanding power dynamics and strategic relationships, but what you're describing operates on principles that are entirely foreign to traditional geopolitics. Exactly, I replied. That's why it works. The conversation that shook the Kremlin. The final 15 minutes of our conversation focused on something that I believe terrifies every traditional power center, the possibility that their influence isn't actually necessary for global stability and prosperity. Putin asked me to explain how we maintained security without foreign military bases, how we attracted investment without accepting foreign control, and how we built regional alliances without triggering international backlash. As I answered each question, I could hear him realizing that everything Russia had told itself about Africa's limitations was wrong. We weren't inherently dependent on foreign expertise. We weren't naturally incapable of sophisticated governance. We weren't inevitably vulnerable to external manipulation. We had been weakened by centuries of interference, but when that interference was removed and replaced with authentic partnership, we proved capable of achievements that impressed even the world's most experienced strategists. President Traoré, Putin said near the end of our call, I have spent decades studying how to project power and influence across continents, but you have achieved more transformative results in 18 months than Russia has achieved in 20 years of African engagement. Then he asked the question that revealed why he had really called. What are you going to do next? The future that terrifies world powers. My answer to Putin's final question is what I believe truly shook the Kremlin. Mr. Putin, we're going to prove that scattered people can reunite, that authentic cooperation is more powerful than strategic competition, and that when families work together across oceans and centuries, they create possibilities that no external power can prevent or replicate. I told him about our plans to expand the African-American Alliance to include 30 African countries within 2 years. I described our vision of African universities that attract global talent because they offer both cutting-edge innovation and authentic cultural connection. I explained our goal of African companies that compete in global markets, not by copying foreign models, but by creating uniquely African solutions to universal challenges. But most importantly, I said, we're going to show the world that black excellence isn't an exception to be celebrated, but a foundation upon which entire civilizations can be built. Putin's final response revealed the depth of his understanding. President Traoré, what you're building isn't just about Africa and African Americans. If you succeed, you'll prove that traditional great power influence is less necessary than the world has assumed. That will change everything. Exactly, I replied, and that's why we're going to succeed. The aftermath that confirmed everything. 3 days after our conversation, something unprecedented happened in Moscow. According to sources within the Russian government, Putin called an emergency meeting with his top Africa advisors and made a stunning announcement. Russia's Africa strategy must be completely reconsidered. We have been operating on assumptions about African capabilities and limitations that are no longer accurate. If we continue treating Africa as a region that needs our guidance, rather than a continent that can teach us new approaches to development and governance, we will become irrelevant to Africa's future. But the most telling development came 2 weeks later. Russia announced a major shift in their Africa engagement strategy. Instead of offering military bases and resource extraction deals, they began proposing technology partnerships and educational exchanges that respected African decision-making authority. Putin had learned something in our 47-minute conversation that changed how the world's most experienced strategist thinks about global power. Authentic cooperation is more powerful than strategic dominance. The global implications. What Putin realized during our 3 a.m. conversation is now reshaping how every world power approaches Africa. When the Kremlin acknowledged that African-American cooperation was creating results that traditional great power strategies couldn't match, it sent a message that extended far beyond Russia and Africa. It suggested that other scattered peoples might be able to reunite in ways that make external control unnecessary. Chinese officials have begun studying our model to understand why their massive investments in Africa are producing less influence than African-American partnerships that involve smaller financial commitments but stronger cultural connections. European leaders are grappling with the reality that their historical ties to Africa matter less than the family bonds that connect continental Africans with African Americans. American policymakers are realizing that their most powerful tool for global influence might not be military bases or economic pressure, but the success of African Americans who choose to build bridges with Africa rather than compete for inclusion in American power structures. The choice that will determine the future. So here we are at a moment that will determine whether Africa fulfills its potential or continues to accept limitations that others have imposed on us. Putin called me at 3 a.m. because he saw what many still ignore. We're not building another regional rival. We're proving that authentic unity makes old power games irrelevant. When 50 million African Americans with 1.6 trillion in power reconnect with 1.3 billion Africans, we unlock possibilities that terrify those who profit from our division. Putin's call proved it. Even the world's sharpest strategists know we're already succeeding. The real question is not if we'll win, but how fast we can become too strong to pressure, too united to divide, too authentic to copy. To my African American brothers and sisters, your partnership with Africa is not just business. It's the reshaping of global power. Your expertise, your investment, your decision to see Africa as home creates results that impress even the world's master strategists. Putin admitted it himself. What we are building together is more transformative than anything in his playbook. The final revelation. Let me end with the most shocking part of Putin's call. Something he said that revealed how profoundly our success has changed global power calculations. President Traore, he said just before hanging up, I have spent my career believing that power comes from the ability to control others, but watching what you've achieved with African Americans has taught me something I never expected to learn. Real power might come from the ability to empower your own people. Then he said something that still gives me chills. If Russia had the kind of authentic partnership with Russian diaspora communities that you have with African Americans, we might be building a different kind of future for our people too. That admission revealed the ultimate truth. Every scattered people watching our reunion is wondering if they could do the same thing. Every traditional power is realizing that their influence depends on keeping people divided from their own potential. But we're proving that division is reversible, that separation can be healed, and that when families work together across oceans and centuries, they create possibilities that no external power can control or replicate. Come home, my brothers and sisters. Not because Africa needs saving, but because together we're building something that even Vladimir Putin calls revolutionary. The future is calling at 3 a.m., and the whole world is listening to our answer. To everyone watching this, what we revealed in that 47-minute conversation isn't just about Russia and Africa, it's about what happens when authentic unity becomes more powerful than strategic competition. If this message resonates with the possibilities you see for your own life and community's future, share it. Because this conversation is proof that when scattered people remember they were never actually divided, even the world's most experienced strategists have to call at 3 a.m. to understand what's happening. And that understanding is changing everything.